My wife Dorothy passed away on a Tuesday. By Thursday, my daughter-in-law was already measuring the windows. She didn't do it with a tape measure. She did it with her eyes. Standing in the doorway of the living room my wife had decorated over 40 years of marriage, tilting her head slowly from one wall to the other, while the funeral home was still arranging the flowers for the viewing. I watched her from the hallway. She didn't know I was there, and when she pulled out her phone and started typing something, I walked away before she could see the look on my face. I'm Harold Mercer. I'm 67 years old. For 4 decades, I built a chain of furniture stores across North Carolina from nothing but a single rented storefront in Asheville and a truck I shared with a man named Curtis, who taught me everything I know about oak grain and customer trust. Mercer's home became something real, something that mattered. 11 stores, 230 employees, a name that people in this part of the country associated with quality and fair dealing. I built all of it with my hands and my wife's encouragement and more early mornings than I care to count. Dorothy was the one who kept the soul of the thing. She knew every manager by name. She sent birthday cards to their children. When we opened our 8th location, she baked 3 dozen peach cobblers and drove them down herself because she said a new store deserves a proper welcome. That was Dorothy. That was my Dot. She was gone now, and my son Raymond and his wife Vanessa were in my house measuring windows. Before I go any further, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for everything you built against people who were supposed to love you, hit like and subscribe. You're going to want to hear how this ends. The reception after the burial was held at our house, the one on Hickory Ridge Road that Dorothy and I moved into when Raymond was 7 years old. 112 people came. Neighbors, church friends, employees who had driven hours to be there. They stood in the rooms my wife had filled with her particular warmth, and they spoke about her in past tense, and I smiled and nodded and thanked them and felt like a man walking underwater. Raymond was working the room the way I had seen him work a sales floor. Firm handshake, direct eye contact, 2 seconds of sincere expression before moving to the next person. He was efficient. He was polished. He was not grieving. Vanessa found me by the fireplace around 4 in the afternoon. She pressed her cheek against mine for the cameras, and then she spoke directly into my ear, the way she always did when she wanted to say something she couldn't say out loud. Raymond and I need to sit down with you this week, she said. The sooner the better, Harold. For everyone. I looked at her. She had the practiced smile she wore to board lunches and charity galas, a smile that never touched the corners of her eyes. My wife isn't buried a full day, I said. I know. And we've given you time to process. She squeezed my arm. But there are things that can't wait. Raymond wants to talk about the transition, the stores, the holdings, the trust. It's time. You know it's time. I looked across the room at Raymond. He was shaking hands with my accountant, a man named Walter, who had worked with me for 22 years. Walter caught my eye over Raymond's shoulder. He gave me a look I couldn't read at the time. A few weeks later, I understood exactly what that look meant. We'll talk, I told Vanessa. Give me a week. She gave me 4 days. On Saturday morning, they sat me down at my own kitchen table with a stack of legal folders and a cup of coffee I hadn't asked for. Raymond spread the documents out like he was presenting a proposal to the board. Transfer of operational authority, signatory rights, a new LLC structure that would put Vanessa's name as managing partner alongside Raymond's. All of it already drafted, all of it already reviewed by a lawyer I had never met. You've had these prepared for a while, I said. We've been planning for the future, Vanessa said. That's what responsible people do. I picked up one of the pages. I read it slowly. I made sure my reading glasses slipped down my nose twice. I made sure my hand trembled slightly when I put the page down. This is a lot to take in, I said. My head is still foggy from everything. Can I have a few days to go through it? Raymond and Vanessa exchanged a look so fast I almost missed it. It was not a look of patience. It was a look of recalculation. Of course, Dad, Raymond said, too warmly. Take your time. We just want what's best for you. What they wanted was my signature. And they wanted it before the quarterly audit that Walter had scheduled for the following month. I didn't know that yet. But I was beginning to understand the shape of things. The first person they removed was Curtis. Curtis Hale had been with me since the beginning. He wasn't just my first hire. He was the reason I survived the first 3 years. When the receivables were short and the rent was due, Curtis worked weekends without asking for overtime. He knew the business the way a farmer knows land in his bones, in his hands, without needing a spreadsheet to tell him what was wrong. I had promised him the regional director role when I retired. I had put that promise in writing. On Monday morning, Vanessa sent him a letter. She called it a restructuring. Curtis called me from the parking lot of our Asheville store, with his voice pulled tight the way a man's voice gets when he's trying not to let it break. She told me my position is being eliminated, he said. Effective at the end of the month. Curtis. She said you authorized it, Harold. She said you signed off on the staffing review before Dorothy passed. I sat with that for a moment. I had signed no such thing. Go home, I told him. Don't clean out your desk yet. I'll fix this. But fixing things required access. And access, I was beginning to learn, was being quietly revoked. That night I heard Raymond on the phone in the upstairs hallway. I was coming back from the bathroom and I stopped at the base of the stairs when I heard his voice drop into the register men use when they believe they are alone. It's moving, Raymond was saying. No, he hasn't pushed back. He's still in shock mode. Easiest window we're going to get. A pause. The shortfall is covered once the transfer goes through. The Raleigh properties alone clear the debt. Yes, all of it. Another pause. Don't call this number again. My wife checks. I went back to my bedroom and sat on the edge of Dorothy's side of the bed. I pressed my palm flat against her pillow and I stared at the ceiling fan turning slowly in the dark. The Raleigh properties. We owned 3 commercial properties in Raleigh that had been in the trust for 15 years. Dorothy and I had argued about selling them once, back in 2018. She said, hold on to what you can't replace. I held on. Raymond was planning to liquidate them to cover a debt. The question was, whose debt? I started the next morning, the way I always started hard days, by doing something with my hands. I went to the garage, and I spent an hour checking the oil on the riding mower and cleaning the workbench. It was a thing I did. It cleared my head. While I was out there, I remembered something. In the filing cabinet beside my workbench, I kept duplicate records, paper copies of contracts, vendor agreements, a backup ledger I maintained in addition to the digital system. Old habit from the early days when I didn't trust computers. Vanessa didn't know this cabinet existed. She wouldn't have thought to look for it because Vanessa was the kind of person who could not imagine that a man like me kept things in a garage. I opened it. It took me most of the morning, but by lunchtime I had laid out on the workbench a picture I wished I hadn't seen. Over the past 18 months, vendor invoices had been submitted for a supplier I didn't recognize, Piedmont Supply Solutions. I had no memory of approving this vendor. The invoices ranged from $12,000 to $45,000, paid out quarterly, totaling just over $200,000. At the bottom of each approved purchase order was my signature. I sat with one of those pages for a long time. I looked at the signature. The H was wrong. I always put a long cross on my H. This one didn't. That wasn't my signature. I pulled out my personal cell phone, not the one Raymond had started checking when I left it on the counter, and I called Walter. I need to see you, I said. Not at the office. Somewhere else. Walter met me that afternoon at a diner on the edge of town that neither of us had reason to visit regularly. He was already in a booth when I arrived, with his coffee untouched and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He had the look of a man who had been waiting to have this conversation for a long time. I put the invoices on the table. He looked at them for about 30 seconds. Then he reached into his briefcase and put another set of documents beside mine. I've been seeing these for 7 months, he said quietly. I flagged them internally. I was told by Raymond that they were approved restructuring expenses and that you had personally authorized the new vendor. I asked to confirm with you directly. I was told you were going through cognitive difficulties and that Raymond was handling your affairs. I set down my coffee cup very carefully. Cognitive difficulties, I repeated. That's the phrase Raymond used. Walter looked at me steadily. Harold, I've known you for 22 years. You are one of the sharpest men I know. But if Raymond has started laying groundwork for that narrative, you need to move fast. Piedmont Supply Solutions, I said. What is it? Walter slid one more page across the table. An LLC registered in Delaware 18 months ago. Single member. The registered agent is a law firm that does this professionally. Ghost addresses, no real footprint. He paused. But the bank account that receives payment from Piedmont belongs to a holding company. And that holding company was opened 6 weeks before the Piedmont vendor was approved. By whom? I asked. Walter looked at me. I can't prove it yet. But the bank account was opened in South Carolina. And Raymond and Vanessa spent a long weekend in Charleston around that time. I have their travel receipts in the company expense log. I sat back in the booth. Outside the window, a truck pulling a horse trailer rolled through the intersection. Just an ordinary Tuesday in an ordinary town. There's something else, Walter said. He slid one final document toward me. It was a printout of an email chain. The subject line read, Mercer Trust Bloodline Provision Review. The trust your father set up, Walter began. I know the trust, I said. Then you know the provision. For the principal holdings to pass to the next generation, the beneficiary must be a direct biological descendant. Adopted grandchildren receive a separate fund, but the main corporate interest stays in the bloodline. That was my father's clause, I said. He wrote it in 1978. Raymond knows it too, Walter said. Read the second email. I put on my glasses. The email was from Vanessa to a family attorney, sent 8 months ago. It read, confirming for our records, Lily's status as direct biological granddaughter of Harold Mercer satisfies the bloodline provision. Please advise on expediting the trust election. I looked up. Lily is my granddaughter. Yes, Walter said. I have no reason to question that. He hesitated. But I have a question for you, Harold. Does Raymond have any medical history you might not be fully aware of? I drove home slowly. I am not a doctor. I am a man who sells furniture and knows how to read a room. But Walter's question sat with me the whole way down the highway, and by the time I pulled into my driveway, I had decided that before I could fight what was in front of me, I needed to understand everything that was underneath it. I went to the attic. Dorothy kept medical records the way she kept everything organized, complete, labeled in her handwriting. I found the family health file in a green accordion folder behind the Christmas decorations, Raymond's pediatric records, his vaccinations, his blood work from the appendix surgery in college, blood type B positive. I found my own records in a separate folder, blood type A positive. I pulled out my wallet and found the donor card I had carried since 1989, B positive. I found Lily's preschool enrollment form in a stack of papers Dorothy had asked me to keep after Vanessa brought them over last spring. Emergency medical line, blood type, AB negative. I am not a doctor, but I raised a son, and I know that 2 B positive parents cannot produce an AB negative child. It is not possible. I sat on the attic floor for a very long time. When I came downstairs, Vanessa was in my kitchen pouring herself a glass of my wine. She had started doing that, treating the house as if the paperwork had already been signed. Where have you been? She asked. Not warmly. The way you ask a child who wandered off. Upstairs, I said, going through some of Dorothy's things. She made a sound that was not quite sympathy and not quite indifference. Somewhere in between. We need to circle back on the documents this week, Harold. The stores can't stay in operational limbo. The managers are getting anxious. I'll take care of it, I said. She nodded, already looking at her phone. What I did not tell her was that I had already taken care of it. That morning, before I met Walter, I had stopped at a medical laboratory on the edge of town. I had brought a coffee mug that Lily always used when she visited, a small purple mug with her name on it in iron-on letters that Dorothy had made for her. I had brought a single hair from my own head. I had requested a grand paternity test on a private basis and paid for it with cash. The results would take 72 hours. I spent those 72 hours being the most cooperative, the most confused, the most pitiable version of Harold Mercer I could perform. I let Vanessa guide me through the grocery store when she insisted on taking me, walking a half step behind her with my hands clasped in front of me like a man who had misplaced the map to his own life. I knocked a glass of orange juice off the breakfast table and looked at the puddle with the bewildered expression of a man meeting it for the first time. I called Raymond by his childhood nickname twice in front of Vanessa and watched her register it with quiet satisfaction. She thought she was watching a man come apart. She was watching a man buy time. On the third night, I woke at 2 in the morning and lay still in the dark listening to the house. Raymond and Vanessa were in the guest room. Lily was in her old room down the hall, the one with the yellow walls Dorothy had painted when Lily was 3, because Lily said yellow was the color of happiness, and Dorothy agreed without hesitation. I had not been allowed to spend time with Lily since the second day of her visit. Vanessa had a reason every time. She's napping. She's watching something. She had a big afternoon and she's cranky. Each reason was reasonable on its own. Together, they formed a wall. I got out of bed. I walked quietly down the hall. I stopped outside Lily's door. I could hear her breathing through the old wood, the deep, untroubled breath of a child who did not know the world was complicated. I stood there for a while, just listening. Then I went back to bed, and I made my decision. Whatever the tests said, she was my granddaughter. I had been there the night she was born. I had walked the hospital hallway with Raymond while Vanessa labored, and I had seen my son's face when the nurse brought that baby out. And even then, something about his expression was not what I expected. Not wonder. Something more calculated. Something that, now, I was only beginning to understand. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:15. It was the lab. I took the call in the garage with the workbench in front of me and the old filing cabinet at my back. The technician's voice was professional and careful and kind. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "the results indicate a 0% probability of grandpaternal relationship. There is no shared genetic material." I thanked her. I hung up. I sat on my old stool and I looked at the cans of wood stain lined up on the shelf above the workbench. Dorothy had helped me organize that shelf. She had alphabetized the labels because she said it made her feel useful, and then she had laughed at herself for alphabetizing wood stain. I pressed my eyes shut. I sat with it. Then I called Calvin. Calvin Marsh had started working for me when he was 19 years old, loading inventory at the Asheville store. He was the son of a furniture restorer who had done occasional work for me in the early days. Calvin had no college degree and no connections and more natural intelligence than anyone I had ever hired. I had watched him for 2 years before I promoted him. I watched him for 5 more before I made him my operations director. He was 34 now, and he knew every inch of Mercer's home the way I knew my own face in the mirror. He was also the only person in the organization who had never once looked at me the way people look at you when they are calculating your expiration date. "I need you to do something for me," I told him. "And I need you not to tell anyone, including the other managers." "Whatever you need," Calvin said. I told him to pull every approved vendor contract from the past 24 months and cross-reference the authorization signatures against the signature card on file in the accounting department. The one I had signed in 1998 when we opened the second store. The original. "How many do you think are wrong?" Calvin asked. "Start counting," I said, "and call me from a different phone." He called me back 6 hours later. The number was 31. 31 purchase orders carrying my name that I had never signed. A total of $412,000 paid out to Piedmont Supply Solutions over 18 months. And the invoices weren't just fraudulent. Several of them were backdated to a period when I had been out of state at a trade show, which I could prove with hotel receipts and a keynote speech I had delivered that was recorded on video. I wasn't just going to clear my name. I was going to bury them in evidence. I spent the rest of that day in a state of cold, absolute calm. I have felt it before twice, both times on the verge of a significant business decision that other people thought was reckless. The calm that comes when you know you are right and you are ready. Dorothy used to say it scared her a little, that calm. She said I got very still, and my eyes went somewhere far away, and she knew that whatever I was looking at, I had already decided. I called my attorney, a woman named Margaret Hollis, who had drafted the original family trust and who had handled every major legal matter in my life for 30 years. I told her everything. I told her about the forged signatures, the fraudulent vendor, the embezzlement totals Calvin had compiled, and the DNA test. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "Harold," she said, "they weren't just stealing from the company." "I know," I said. "They were setting you up to take the fall. The cognitive decline narrative, the rush to get power of attorney. If the audit had gone through before you acted, the signatures would have pointed to you." "I know," I said again. Do you want them arrested quietly, or do you want the whole thing on the table? I looked out the kitchen window at the oak tree in the backyard. Dorothy had planted it the year we moved in. It was taller than the house now. I want them to stand in a room full of people who trusted them, I said, and I want them to watch it all come down. Margaret understood immediately. I called Raymond's cell phone that evening from the kitchen, while Vanessa was watching television in the next room. I've been thinking, I said, making my voice soft. Uncertain. About the papers. Raymond's relief was audible. Yeah? What are you thinking, Dad? I think you're right. I think I've been holding on too long. It's time to let go. A pause. That's really good to hear. Really. Can we do it this week? I'd like to do it at the office. Somewhere formal. I think Dorothy would have wanted it done properly. Absolutely, Raymond said, and his voice had that quality again, that smoothness that I recognized now for what it was. A man who thought he had won, trying to sound like he had simply helped. Invite the managers, I said. The senior staff. If I'm stepping back, they should hear it from me directly. It's the respectful way. Of course, Raymond said. Of course, Dad. I hung up. I sat in the quiet kitchen. I heard Vanessa laugh at something on television. I picked up my phone and texted Calvin. Thursday at 10. Call the managers in. All of them. Then I texted Margaret. Thursday. Bring the file. Then I did something I hadn't done in days. I went to Lily's room and knocked on the door softly. There was a shuffling sound, and then her small voice. Who is it? It's Grandpa, I said. I just wanted to say goodnight. A pause. Then the sound of small feet on the floor. The door opened 3 inches and one bright eye appeared in the gap. She looked at me seriously the way children do when they are evaluating an adult's trustworthiness. Mommy said I should stay in my room tonight, she said. I know, I said. I won't come in. I just wanted to see your face. She opened the door a little wider. She was wearing pajamas with small yellow ducks on them. Her hair was in 2 lopsided ponytails that she had clearly done herself. Are you sad, Grandpa? She asked. I looked at her face. I had looked at it 100 times and seen my family there. Now I looked at it and saw something else, a child who was completely innocent of everything happening around her. A child who deserved better than the story she'd been born into. A little, I said honestly, but not for much longer. She reached out and patted my hand once, solemnly, the way she had seen grown-ups do at the funeral. Grandma said you were the strongest man she ever knew, she told me. I had to look away for a moment. She said that to you? She said it lots of times. Lily tilted her head. I think she was right. I kissed the top of her head through the gap in the door. I told her to sleep well. I walked back down the hall to my bedroom and I sat on the edge of the bed and I let myself feel all of it for exactly 5 minutes. The grief and the fury and the loss and the love, and then I put it away and I went to sleep. I had work to do in the morning. The conference room on the 3rd floor of our Asheville headquarters had a long maple table I had chosen myself in 1994. I had gone to 4 different suppliers before I found the right grain. Dorothy had thought I was being ridiculous. I told her the table set the tone for everything that happened around it, and she had rolled her eyes and said that was the most Harold Mercer thing she'd ever heard. At 10 o'clock on Thursday morning, 12 managers sat around that table, people who had worked for me for years, people who knew the company the way you know a place you've given real time to. They looked nervous. They had been told this was about the succession plan, and they were braced for change. Raymond sat at the far end of the table from me. He was in his best suit. Vanessa stood behind him, one hand on his chair. They looked like people who had rehearsed. I sat at my end with Calvin beside me and Margaret Hollis at my left. Margaret had placed her briefcase on the table with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what was inside it. Vanessa clocked Margaret immediately. Her eyes narrowed. Who is this? She asked. My attorney, I said pleasantly. She's been with me for 30 years. I don't sign anything significant without her present. You know that, Vanessa. Vanessa's jaw tightened. She looked at Raymond. He gave a small shake of his head. They were recalibrating. Raymond stood. He launched into what was clearly a prepared speech about transition and legacy and his vision for the company. He was good at it, smooth, confident, painting a picture of innovation and growth. The managers listened politely. 2 of them nodded. He slid the transfer documents down the table toward me. "All you need to do, Dad," he said, warm and easy, "is sign on the pages Margaret has flagged, and we'll have everything formalized before lunch." I looked at the documents. I reached for the pen Raymond had placed near my hand. I let my fingers hover over it. Then I set my hand flat on the table, and I looked down the length of the maple surface at my son. "I'm not going to sign these," I said. The warmth left Raymond's face with the speed of a light being switched off. "Dad, I'm not finished." My voice was steady. It was the voice I used the day I told my bank I was declining their loan terms in 1991, and I would find another lender, the voice that said, "I have already decided, and your objection is noted but irrelevant. I am not signing because these documents don't transfer a business. They transfer a liability. And the people in this room deserve to know why." I nodded at Margaret. She opened her briefcase and slid a stack of documents to Calvin, who stood and walked them down the table, placing a packet in front of each manager. "What is this?" Vanessa said. Her voice was still controlled, but the edges were starting to fray. "Forensic accounting," I said. 31 fraudulent purchase orders spanning 18 months. $412,000 paid to a vendor that doesn't exist. Authorized by signatures that were not mine. I paused. "Calvin, would you read the first line of the authentication report?" Calvin read, "Handwriting analysis confirms with 96% certainty that the signatures on Exhibits A through AE do not match the known signature sample of Harold Mercer, dated April 1998. The room went very quiet. One of my longest-serving managers, a woman named Patricia who had opened our 4th store with me back in 2001, looked up from the packet with an expression I recognized. It was the same expression I had worn in my garage when I first understood what I was looking at. "Raymond," I said, "I'd like you to explain Piedmont Supply Solutions." Raymond's face had gone the gray-white of old plaster. This is taken out of context. There was a restructuring. You approved." "I approved nothing," I said. "I have hotel receipts, a keynote recording, and airline records proving my location on the dates of a third of these authorizations." Margaret slid a second packet down the table. Vanessa moved first. She straightened, she smoothed her jacket, and she pointed at me with the steady finger of a woman who has prepared a backup narrative for every contingency. "Harold has been in cognitive decline," she said, addressing the managers directly. "We have been managing his affairs for months because he has been unable to do so himself. This theater is what happens when an elderly man in grief is manipulated by people who want access to his estate." She looked at Calvin with something between contempt and calculation. "Whoever put him up to this?" "Vanessa." I said her name the way you say a child's name when they have gone far enough. Just the name, nothing else. She stopped. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. I removed a single folded page. I unfolded it and laid it on the table. "This is a DNA test," I said, "commissioned privately, conducted by a licensed laboratory, and received by me 48 hours ago." I looked down the table at Raymond. "It compares my genetic markers to those of my granddaughter Lily." Vanessa's hand moved to Raymond's shoulder. I watched the grip tighten. "The result is 0% probability of a grandparental relationship," I said. The room fractured. Multiple voices, chairs moving, Patricia's hand going to her mouth. Raymond stood up so fast his chair rolled back and struck the wall. "You had no right," he said. His voice had broken open. The smooth surface was gone, and what was underneath was something younger and more frightened. "She is my daughter. She is. She is not your biological child," I said. "And you knew that before she was born." The silence after that had a physical weight. Margaret reached into the briefcase, a final time, and placed the last document on the table. It was a medical record from a clinic in Atlanta. Raymond's name across the top. A procedure date from 9 years ago. "A voluntary procedure," Margaret said quietly to the room. "Performed before Raymond and Vanessa were married. He has known since before Lily was born that he could not father children biologically." Raymond sat down slowly. He looked at the maple table. The table I had spent 3 weeks choosing because the grain mattered, because the tone mattered, because what you build a room around matters. Vanessa's face had moved through several expressions in the space of 30 seconds. Rage, calculation, panic, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding that there was no play left to run. "She came from a donor," Vanessa said, and her voice was different now, stripped down. "We used a donor. It's not a crime." "No," I agreed. "Using a donor is not a crime. Presenting that child as a biological heir to unlock a 40-year-old trust provision without disclosing the truth, that is fraud." I folded my hands on the table, as is forging a man's signature $412,000 worth of times. Raymond was crying. Quietly, the way men cry when they have no performance left in them. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the window. "I needed to fix the investment," he said, "not to anyone in particular." The Greenville development went sideways. The partners were calling in the debt. I didn't know what else to do. A pause. Mom would have. "Don't," I said. The word came out sharper than I intended. "Don't put your mother in this room." He looked at me then. For the first time since the funeral, he looked at me without the calculation. He just looked tired and ashamed and young in a way he hadn't looked in years. I looked back at him for a long time. I thought about the morning he was born, the way Dorothy had held him up for me to see, and the way the light in that hospital room had seemed to shift somehow, as if the world had rearranged itself around this new thing we had made together. I thought about the car trips and the Little League games and the college move-in day when he had hugged me in the parking lot longer than he'd hugged me in years. I thought about all of it, and I let it be what it was, real and gone, and not something that could save him from this. "Margaret," I said. She stood. She pressed the button on the conference room phone. "You can come in now." The door opened. 2 investigators from the district attorney's office entered. They were quiet and professional. They spoke directly to Raymond and Vanessa about their rights. They were not unkind about it. Vanessa asked to call her attorney. Raymond didn't say anything. He sat at the maple table and he looked at his hands and he let them lead him out. I didn't follow them to the door. I sat at the head of the table that I had chosen for the grain of it, for the way it would anchor every conversation that happened around it. And I looked at the faces of the people who had given years to this company. Patricia, who had helped me through my worst quarter in 2008 without a word of complaint. The young manager from our Wilmington store who had driven 3 hours and clearly hadn't slept. 12 people who deserved better than what had nearly happened to them. "The pension accounts are intact," I said. I confirmed that with Walter before this meeting. No one's retirement was touched. I heard someone exhale. "The vendor fraud will be fully recovered through the legal process. We are solid." Patricia raised her hand. She looked like she was trying not to cry. "What happens now, Harold?" I turned to Calvin. He was still standing by the wall where he'd been since delivering the packets. He was wearing the same plain blazer he wore every Thursday. He was looking at me with an expression that was trying very hard not to be hopeful. I said, "Most of you don't know Calvin's full story. He started here as a 19-year-old loading dock worker. His father did furniture restoration, work, good work, honest work. Calvin never asked me for anything he didn't earn. For 15 years, I watched him make every decision with the company's well-being in mind, not just his own." I looked around the table. "I am stepping into a chairman role effective today. Oversight, guidance, available when needed. But Mercer's home needs someone in this chair who will be here every day." I looked at Calvin. "That's going to be Calvin Marsh." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Patricia started clapping. It spread around the table without hesitation. Calvin's expression moved through about 4 things in quick succession and settled somewhere that was not quite composed. "Come sit down," I told him, gesturing to the chair beside me. "We have work to do, and you might as well start." I left the building 2 hours later. The parking lot was warm, the October sun slanting low through the trees that lined the property. I sat in my truck for a while before starting it. I thought about Lily at home with the nanny we had arranged, drawing in her sketchbook, completely unaware that the world she knew had just reorganized itself around her. I thought about what came next for her, the proper legal arrangements, the care she deserved, the conversations that would have to happen honestly and carefully over the coming months. I would make sure of all of it. She was not my blood. She was still my girl. Those 2 things could be true at the same time, and I had decided they would be. I thought about Raymond. I thought about the night he was born, and I let myself feel the full weight of what I had done and what I'd had to do, and how those two things were not the same. Then I started the truck. I drove west out of Asheville, through the hills Dorothy and I had driven on Sunday afternoons, when Sundays were still our own. The trees were just beginning to turn that first early blush of red at the edges of the oaks that always came before you were ready for it. Dorothy used to say fall was the season that reminded you to let things go. That leaves only got their color when they were ready to leave the branch. I drove until I reached the overlook on the Blue Ridge Parkway, where we used to stop with a thermos of coffee and watch the valley fill with morning. I parked. I got out. I stood at the railing with the wind moving through the trees below and the hills running blue and gold into the distance. 40 years, 11 stores, 230 people who came to work each morning because something I built was worth coming to. A granddaughter with lopsided ponytails who told me her grandmother thought I was strong. A young man named Calvin who was sitting right now in the maple table room learning the weight of a responsibility he had earned. I pulled my collar up against the wind. I looked out at the hills Dorothy had loved. I had lost a son today. That wound would be a long time healing, and I did not pretend otherwise. But the man who had driven to the laboratory with a purple coffee mug and a single strand of his own hair, the man who had stood up straight in a room full of people who expected him to stay sitting, that man had not lost anything worth keeping. I stayed at the overlook until the light began to change. Then I got back in the truck and I drove home. Family is not who shares your name. It is not who shares your blood. It is who shows up when the cost of showing up is real and stays anyway. I spent 40 years learning how to build structures that would last. It took me 1 week to understand that the strongest foundation I ever stood on was not poured concrete or seasoned oak. It was the people who were still standing beside me when everything else had been stripped away. If you were in my position, would you have found a way to forgive your son, or was there a point of no return? Tell me in the comments. And if this story reminded you of your own, hit like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.